Unshelling Medicine podcast. Healthcare in the language we understand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back here. Today, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Martin Moore-Ede on. Dr. Martin is a former professor at Harvard, and he's also the author of the new book, The Light Doctor, which we're mostly going to base our conversation on today. So, Dr. Martin Moore-Ede, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you. Idongesit.
Yes.
Yes. I get your name correct to start with.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. There's so much in the name, and thank you for asking how to pronounce it. So, Dr. Martin, so people are wondering, the Light Doctor, what is that?
Well, it's about something that really we've not paid much attention to in nursing or in medicine.
Right.
It is the fact that light is important to your health as the food you eat, the water you drink, and the air you breathe. And in fact, talking about nursing, which I know is your profession,
Right.
Florence Nightingale knew this many years ago. She said, the most important things about getting someone healed and back to health
Right.
was actually making sure they had good exposure to sunlight during the day and sleeping in the dark at night. She knew the principle.
Right.
We've changed all that with our modern world where we spend all our time indoors, and our homes and hospitals and our workplaces are now full of these LED lights that pump out lots of blue rich light. And that's a big problem because it's causing a lot of unnecessary disease and illness and ill health and fatigue. So that's the issue. And now we know something about it and why, which certainly wasn't known until relatively recently. There is something we can do about it, which is make sure we got lights that are healthy. And we can talk about what those are and how do we know, what type of light we should use when.
That is very interesting because I would certainly love to know, and I know the listeners, whether business owners or medical practitioners would also love to know to implement it into their practice. Even everyday people would want to know so they could either limit themselves to exposure of the modern lighting technologies we have, live to be healthy. Because the one thing that I find with what I do and having to have this platform is that most people don't know the alternatives. So let us hear from you. And I would be interested in knowing how you got started in this. But first, I would like to hear from you. What are the alternatives to what we find in our workplaces, like the modern LED lights, what we have in our homes today?
Well, the whole problem comes down to is we have circadian clocks in our body. In other words, not only our sleep, but our hormones and every part of our metabolism is governed by a rhythm that's as old as life itself.
Right.
That, in fact, we function very differently during the day and the night. And that used to be very simple because most of our ancestors lived outside during the daytime, got plenty of bright, rich daylight. But during the nighttime, they didn't have electric light, so they slept in the dark at night. We've changed all that by, first of all, of course, Thomas Edison invented electric light 120 years ago. But particularly in the modern era, in the last 10 years, we've done some devastating things because we've introduced these so-called efficient LED lights, and we've banned incandescents and banned halogens, the old type of lighting we used to use. But the problem is these LED lights contain way too much blue in them. And I'll explain why. Our health relies on us being synchronized robustly to day and night. The signal our eyes use is actually a sky blue color. It's not light itself. It's a sky blue part of the spectrum that really does the trick. And there are receptors in our eye that detect sky blue light. They're called melanopsin receptors, or we get the technical name, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, but they're cells in the back of the eye that detect this blue light. And when they see blue light, it activates the body for daytime. And when they see no blue light, it activates all the recovery, repair things that normally happen at night. Now, as we introduced electric light, and particularly these LED lights, we're shining this rich blue light on ourselves night and day.
Right.
And that is suppressing our melatonin. It is increasing the risk of, and we now know this, of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and certain cancers. And we know the more exposure to electric light at night you have, the higher risk of these diseases and the shorter your lifespan. So, yes, it's really critically important to understand how do we find lights that are rich in blue during the day, and preferably getting outside every day to get natural sunlight. And how do we protect ourselves at night from this very harmful effect of the modern LED lights, which is causing all sorts of conditions. Breast cancer rates are climbing, diabetes, obesity rates are climbing, all those problems that are related to the light we see. And so few people really pay attention to it because they take light for granted.
Right. Well, that is scary, and that is eye-opening all at the same time. So just going back to my profession. So in nursing, the shift workers, right? So you have your day shift, you have your evening shift, and then your overnight shift. And to find out or discover that there is harmful effects of exposing yourself to the LED lighting, which is what we find in most hospitals, right? Because we have to light the hallways. Your computers have, that light for charting. What would you say is the occupational hazard for a nurse, a doctor, a nursing assistant, whoever is working in a care setting on the overnight? So already going against the natural circadian rhythm is one, right? So what are the added dangers for people who have, worked this shift long term? Or has there been studies about that?
Yeah, excellent question. And in fact, we've known since the 2000, about 25 years ago,
right,
just the turn of this last century, the first 3 major studies coming out looking at people who are working night shifts and day shifts, for example, the breast cancer rates. And breast cancer rates are 50% higher in those nurses working night shifts than those nurses who weren't working night shifts. And we're talking about young premenopausal nurses. And that has gone on, and we now know why. It's because the light is suppressing, the blue light in the lights is suppressing melatonin. And melatonin turns out to be a cancer suppressant. In other words, melatonin really protects you against cancers. And it's, it is breast cancer in women, it's prostate cancer in men, and colorectal cancer are the ones, the endocrine sensitive cancers, most sensitive. But there's some other broader statistics too that really are eye-opening. Before electric light, before Edison, breast cancer was an extremely rare disease. As electric lights developed all over the world and were introduced, the breast cancer rates climbed 6-fold. But in those parts of the world, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't have electrification, the breast cancer rates are where they used to be before Edison came along in the Western world. So in other words, about 20 cases per 100,000 women. Now it's 120, 140 cases in the Western world in people exposed to electric light. So it's not just night shift workers, because we know, and a few other things that are interesting here. We know that women who sleep with the lights on at night get 40% higher rates of breast cancer. So sleeping with the lights on at night, you might do it because you're anxious or whatever else. That is actually not only affects cancer rates, but it doubles the rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease, people sleeping with the lights on. So it's not working necessarily, but even sleeping that does it. It's not the workplace. We also know that blind women rarely get breast cancer. Women who are totally blind since an early age. Now, they are exposed to all the same chemicals in our environment, all the other things you might blame these cancers on. They've got the same exposures, but they don't get breast cancer to nearly the same rate, particularly if they're totally blind and it's been since an early age. So that is part of the whole story now. So we're now recognizing an awful lot of ill health is unnecessary because, in fact, it relates to, just using lights and taking light for granted and not realizing what you're doing. So there's some very, before we go further, we probably should just give the very key basics, all right?
Right.
Sleep in the dark at night, or sleep when you're off shift and sleep in the dark, okay? and make sure the room is fully darkened and everything else. That's number one. Get out, certainly if you're on a regular work schedule or life schedule, get out, particularly in the mornings, and get exposed to natural sunlight and daylight. It doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day or not. There's plenty of that blue-rich light. We know the mornings are important because patients in rooms facing and getting the morning sun, because the rooms are facing south and east, are get out of hospital in half the time, particularly in psychiatric conditions, than those who are facing in rooms facing north and west. This is actually something that, Florence Nightingale sort of guessed was going on, and why she moved people around so they can get exposed to sun.
Right.
Particularly in the morning. So get out in the morning, and that's really take the dog for a walk, whatever, jog, whatever doing, but get out in the mornings is really critical.
Right.
And as the evening comes around, make sure that the lights you use have zero blue content. Now, you can have light that has no blue in it, and those are invented now and available. Some people use red lights or orange lights, but you can also lights that are more normal looking that are called zero blue lights that are available. And then again, as I say, sleep in the darkness at night and keep on a regular pattern. That has a huge impact on health.
Right.
We've got huge studies now. 88,000 people tracked how much light they saw during the day, how much light they saw at night. In those people, they live years longer, people who sleep in the dark at night and get out in the daylight. Their rates of cardiac disease, cardiac metabolic disease, diabetes and cardiovascular disease is significantly reduced. So it's a huge effect, and one that I think people really need to know about, and why, as I say in my book, The Light Doctor, I really explain this to a lay audience. It's written to really understand why you need to choose the lights very carefully that you use, because today we're surrounded by junk light that's just like junk food and does as much harm.
I like how you correlated it to junk food. You're right.
I mean, it's packaged nicely. It looks good. All those things, right? Like junk food, right? It might even taste good or feel good, but it's devastating.
Right. You're right. So going back to the night light, where, for comfort, anxiety, whatever the case. You did mention, and I like that you segue into that, because that would have been my next question. What if a person uses a night light as opposed to keeping the light on? Also, I know a group of people who listen to white noise and they feel more comforted or relaxed to have the TV on, even if it's on static. To that population who may be listening to us, what are the alternatives to not harm yourself in the process of relaxing yourself?
Well, and I'm fully sympathetic to the issues of, being nervous. I mean, I found out, much to my surprise, that when I travel out of town, my own wife, sleeps with the lights on until I realized what was going on. Just so I fully recognize it's a common thing. The answer is you can get the noise, other ways. You can get static noise other ways. If you cover up the TV, that would be good. The point is that screens like TVs are also producing this blue-rich light, because they're all based on the same LEDs these days. So yes, you need to avoid that. You can certainly, having sound or music or anything like that certainly is not going to be harmful at all and can certainly help. And certainly having the noise of a fan or something like that can help people sleep and block out other noises. But you have to be very careful about the lights. Now, if you do need light, for example, you need light to make sure you don't trip over on the way to the bathroom, you can use these lights that are yellow or orangey yellow color that basically have no blue in them. And they're little things you can put in the light socket readily available that do this. And so those lights will not be a problem. So you can have some light in the room, enough to see, but it makes sure that it's not containing blue. When you have if you have an alarm clock, an electric alarm clock in the room, make sure the dial is not white or blue, because that white light contains a lot of blue, and blue is obviously why you wouldn't want that. Use a red dial instead. The red light is safe. So it's really a question of getting rid of that blue is the key. You can have some light if you need it, but it really is being very careful to get rid of the blue content of light. And most people don't realize that white light is made of all the colors of the rainbow.
Right.
Your eyes can't tell that. You just see it as white. The brain puts it together as a white light. But in fact, most white light these days is very rich in blue. So you have to be careful about white-looking lights.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that. So my next question about, exposure to sunlight. We are in the Western world getting into winter. And in medicine, we know there's usually an uptick of seasonal affective disorder because of, the lack of exposure to sunlight, right? It causes depressive episodes. So for people in regions that could be affected by seasonal affective disorder, what would be your recommendation? So going out in the morning, especially the morning sunlight, rich in vitamin D, yes, that's all good and great. But what if you live in an area where with the season changing, you have more darkness in a sense than light?
Well, you can help supplement by using light boxes that will produce that. But you want the blue-rich light, remember, in the mornings. In other words, blue isn't bad or good. It's just the time of day you see it.
Okay.
So that's often people with seasonal affective disorders are treated with a light box of some sort that can shine that blue-rich light into your eyes, and making sure they sit in front of that or have that shining on them in the morning hours. The other side of it, by the way, is, should also mention there are other solution that you can use is blue blocking glasses in the evenings because you want to get rid of the blue. But those blue blocking glasses have to be quite careful. A lot of them are blocking quite the wrong blue.
Okay.
So if it looks, the glasses have to look yellow-orangey in color usually to be able to block the correct blue. But the seasonal affective disorders, yes, you can treat this. It's all part of adjusting to this because we're living in a very unnatural world. In the old days, we used to live, our ancestors lived in extremely bright light outside. It's more than 100 times brighter outside than it is indoors. And during the nighttime, it was 100 times, we're now living in light that is 100 times brighter than moonlight at night. So we've really screwed up our natural rhythms and our patterns. And as much as you can get back to that, it's going to help your psychiatric health, your depression, your mood. It's going to help your performance. Certainly going to help your sleep. And it's going to avoid those risks of those really debilitating illnesses that develop over time. So even if you're young and not particularly worried right now about whether you're going to get heart disease or whatever else, that's a long way off. Just following a natural pattern really makes a huge impact on your well-being and your health and your longevity.
Right. So I'm almost curious, how did this start for you?
Well, it started for me because I graduated out of medical school as a doctor in England, and I came over the Atlantic to do a surgical internship. I was going to be a surgeon. And I found myself working 36-hour-long shifts on duty and then 12 hours off to collapse and sleep and back in for 36 hours. These are incredible, ridiculous hours that young surgeons are asked to work. And I found myself, and I was doing it all under bright blue-rich fluorescent lights at that time. So before LEDs existed. So I was walking around like a zombie. I was falling asleep, nodding off in the operating room. I was writing prescriptions I couldn't make sense of the next day. So I got really interested in this. And I took a detour out of that. After I finished the first part of my residency, I went down to Harvard and joined and did a PhD there to really probe into these rhythms, these circadian rhythms, the 24-hour rhythms of the body. And this is before the circadian clock was invented or identified, I should say. And then from there, I joined the faculty as a professor for 23 years and led a team there where we discovered where this circadian clock was in the human brain. We discovered that it was synchronized by light. And then more recently, I've been involved in identifying the precise wavelengths, the sky blue wavelengths in light that are causing all the havoc and that we need to control. And then I went on to developing, light bulbs and light fixtures that could solve this problem. But we're in a transition now where people really need to know about it. And, the solution now is available. right?
Right.
We know what the problem is, we know what the solution is, but most people are quite unaware. The scientists understand this. I led a team of 250 scientists around the world, the leading experts. We all came to a consensus that these LED lights on the market today should carry a warning label saying may be harmful to your health. And certainly, we've also put these lights in over 60 Fortune 500 companies in their workplaces where people are working around the clock. So, yes, it's available and coming on board, but most people don't even know enough to ask about it, and they need to know something more. So my book, The Light Doctor, is where you can find more about it.
Right.
And I'd urge you to your listeners to take a look at that book, because it will really explain in clear terms what the issues are and how to solve it for you and your loved ones.
Absolutely. So for everybody listening, we are going to include Dr. Martin's book, link how to get it, and also how to reach out to him. So I am very interested to learn more and also educate myself so I can, better educate whoever is around me or whoever I have the opportunity to impact. So, Dr. Moore, I want to talk a little bit about the fixtures available on the marketplace, especially for employers or those corporate companies looking to make a difference in the employees' lives. So, is there a particular place they can order it, learn about it, learn to implement it? Because with a change like that, it is going to go in phases, right? Especially if it's a big company. So how do they, work around? How do they get around to implementing this changes in changing the fixtures?
Well, the fixtures are now available.
Okay.
One of the companies that produces it are a company called EchoSense, and we're talking about their Lumim, their circadian blue fixtures, they're called.
Okay.
Basically, these are fixtures that automatically change with the time of day. In other words, they provide the blue-rich light during the daytime hours, and then automatically, when the evening comes, they switch to light that is zero blue content. There's no blue in it, but still provides good illumination. So this is so-called circadian lighting, and it's as a automatic because it just automatically switches. You don't have to worry about remembering to switch it on and off to different conditions. And as I say, those are now available in attractive lighting, and certainly those are the sort of lights that people are starting to are installing. And we'd encourage everybody to, ask about it and so forth. And I can provide, some links to where to find more about it. One place you can look at is a website called circadianlight.org,
Okay.
which provides links to, the different types of lighting that's available.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we will provide all of that to our listening audience so they can educate themselves and also implement these changes. So before I let you go, I really want us to continue this conversation, but before I let you go, something that is close to my own heart is children. So what is your take on children and the tablet use? Because we know the tablets are very high in those blue lighting.
Well, it's an issue, and in fact, we now know that children are even more sensitive than adults to this blue light, and so that's something we really need to pay attention to. And we know even late afternoon light is also a problem for children. It suppresses their melatonin, and it's going to impact their sleep and well-being. Now there are two sides of the tablet use, right?
Okay.
One side is people using it late at night and getting their brains activated, and depending on what they're watching and doing, or the social media they're on, that has a psychological impact which can disrupt sleep.
Right.
The other, of course, is the impact on their circadian clock. So we have more than one thing going on there. So again, wise use of tablets is really something that needs to be paid attention to.
So, yeah. Thank you so much. This was so insightful. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I learned quite a bit, and I'm hoping you did as well. So we are going to include all the information that was discussed on this episode. And Dr. Martin Moore, it was great having you on. It was absolutely great. So from a professor to a professor, I really appreciate you being here to educate people. If anybody wants to get involved either with your organization, the scientists that you work with, somebody who wants to also help in either providing more data or providing education to the general public? How is that possible?
Well, again, there is on that website, circadianlight.org, there's a place to sort of join a campaign for healthy lighting. And I think people need to do that and learn how to do that. So we're really getting a lot of movements all over the world, by the way. People are getting, I'm currently helping the Australians, a number of people in Australia, petition their government regulators about healthy lighting and so forth. So we're getting a lot of interest there. So circadianlight.org, there's a place to sign up there, and we can keep you informed. But, as I say, I would argue that or suggest that starting with my book is really the key thing you want, because that book is something when you can put in the hands of your boss or your employer or your person responsible for the health of your workplace, that gives them the material to realize this is not just something, one odd idea. This is something with a huge science behind it. Right. Over 10,000 scientific papers on this subject in the last 10 years or so. So there's a huge amount of work on this and a huge amount of evidence. And, it's a problem we know how to solve it, just as people need to become aware.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So please listen, engage, let us know what changes have you learned to make, will you make for your health, and what questions you may have. So I'm hoping that we can keep this going. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Idongesit.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to Unshelling Medicine podcast. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Altruistic Scribe on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We share additional tips, updates, and health-related content that you won't want to miss. Have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes? Reach out to us at altruisticscribeco.com. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and tackle the health topics that matter most to you. Until next time, stay healthy and take care.